The grease was popping before the sun came up, a spoonful of batter hitting cast iron with a hiss you could hear from the porch. That sound meant somebody loved you enough to fry before dawn. Here are 30 forgotten, deep-fried desserts that made 1960s soul food so good. Fried peach hand pies were the kind of dessert you smelled before you saw the plate. Dried peaches simmered to a thick, sweet pulp, spooned onto rounds of biscuit dough, folded shut, and slid into a cast iron skillet of hot lard. In North Carolina, folks called them peach jacks, and the name alone could start a family argument. The secret was always dried fruit, never fresh. Families hung peach slices on strings in late summer until they shriveled into chewy ribbons of concentrated sweetness. You knew the oil was right by the sound, a sharp crackle the instant the edge hit the surface. Black cooks across Georgia and the Carolinas wrapped these in wax paper for field workers and packed them into baskets for church homecomings. They traveled north during the Great Migration, tucked into suitcases for long train rides. You can find versions at gas stations now, but they carry none of the warmth. The ones she fried with peaches she dried herself and dough she mixed by feel. Those disappeared the morning she stopped getting up early enough to make them. Before doughnuts came in boxes, there were molasses, dough balls, small rounds of flour, egg, and dark molasses dropped by the spoonful into shimmering lard. They puffed golden and crisp outside while staying dense and chewy within, carrying the smoky sweetness only blackstrap molasses could give. During the Depression, when white sugar was beyond reach for most black households in the rural South, molasses kept dessert alive. A jar cost almost nothing and stretched further than anything in the pantry. Mothers in Alabama and Mississippi fried batches on Saturday afternoons, rolling the hot balls in whatever sugar they had. Sometimes brown, sometimes raw cane, sometimes nothing, because the molasses was sweet enough alone. Kids lined up at the stove with outstretched palms, burning fingers and not caring. What started as a way to make something from almost nothing became the treat kids begged for even when the pantry was full. She mashed them while they were still hot, sweet potatoes pulled from the oven, skins splitting, steam rising off the orange flesh. Mixed with flour, a crack of egg, nutmeg, grated fresh, and just enough sugar to let the potato lead. Fried sweet potato cakes had roots running to West Africa, where similar fritters called puff-puff were fried in palm oil at open markets. In the American South, the technique adapted to what grew in black family gardens: sweet potatoes by the bushel, shaped by hand, flattened into thick patties, and fried in lard until the edges crisped into a caramel dark crust while the center stayed soft. The key was never over-mixing. You wanted flecks of potato in every bite. Sprinkled with cinnamon and served hot, they showed up at Sunday tables and after-church gatherings. By the 1980s, boxed mixes replaced from scratch frying, and these quiet cakes slipped off the table without anyone asking for the recipe until it was too late. Long before beignets became the face of New Orleans, black women walked the French Quarter at dawn carrying covered baskets, calling out in Creole, "Beautiful Calas," still hot. These rice fritters were made from leftover cooked rice mixed with yeast, eggs, sugar, flour, and nutmeg, fried in deep lard until golden and dusted heavy with powdered sugar. The word traces to West African languages, the Yoruba akara and Nupe kara, both meaning fried cake, carried across the Atlantic by enslaved people who adapted the recipe to Louisiana rice. Under Spanish colonial rule, enslaved people could purchase their freedom, and Calas became one of the ways black women earned that price, selling fritters penny by penny. By the 1940s, only a handful of Calas women remained. The beignet pushed them aside, No overnight yeast rise needed. A dessert that once bought people their freedom barely survives now in a few Creole cookbooks and the memories of families who remember the taste. If those peach pies belong to summer, fried apple turnovers owned the fall. The apples were always dried, never fresh. Dried fruit concentrated the flavor into something candy-like and held together without turning to mush. Families sliced their own from backyard trees each September, stringing them above the wood stove to cure. The dough was simple: flour, lard, salt, cold water, rolled thin and cut with the rim of a coffee cup. A spoonful of stewed apples in the center, edges crimped with a fork, and the whole thing slid into lard so hot it sealed the crust on contact. You never pierced the dough before frying. A single hole meant the filling leaked and the oil went dark. Kids learned that rule before they learned to read. These traveled in coat pockets to school, in baskets to church, in paper sacks to funerals. When bananas turned black on the counter, too soft for slicing, too sweet for anything sensible, that was exactly when they became perfect. Fried banana fritters took overripe fruit and turned it into something golden, crisp, and impossibly rich. Mashed into batter with flour, a beaten egg, sugar, and cinnamon, then dropped in rounds into hot lard. The natural sugars caramelized against the oil, creating edges that crackled into the warm center. Caribbean influence ran deep. Plantain fritter versions existed across the islands, and as families from Jamaica and Trinidad settled in southern port cities during the 1940s and 50s, those recipes merged with African American frying traditions already old. Some cooks added vanilla. Others drizzled brown sugar dissolved in butter over the top. The whole thing cost almost nothing and used fruit headed for the trash, resourceful and indulgent in the same bite. Cornmeal fried cakes did not come from a recipe book. They came from watching, standing close enough to feel the heat while someone older stirred cornmeal into sweetened batter and dropped it by the handful into smoking lard. You poured until the batter looked right, cracked the egg without counting, added sugar until you tasted it off your fingertip. These were the original doughnuts of rural black kitchens. No yeast, no rising time, no special pan. The cakes fried up with a gritty golden crust and a tender center that tasted like cornbread, and cake agreed on something sweet. Across the Mississippi Delta, cornmeal never ran out, making these the dessert that survived every lean month and every empty shelf. The women who fried them could finish a dozen without burning one, hands steady in the smoke. Peanut butter was cheap, flour was cheaper, and when you rolled one inside the other with powdered sugar and dropped it into hot oil, you had something that tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. Fried peanut butter balls appeared in black households during the 1940s and 50s when George Washington Carver's work at Tuskegee Institute had pushed the peanut across the South, and jars sat in pantries from rural Georgia to Harlem. The balls were simple: peanut butter mixed stiff with powdered sugar, rolled small, dipped in light batter, and fried until the coating crackled. Inside, the peanut butter melted into something almost molten, sticking to the roof of your mouth. Church women packed them into tins for bake sales where a dozen sold for a dime. The trick was speed: 30 seconds too long and the filling turned bitter. Only the ones who had fried them 100 times got it right, and they never told you the secret was oil temperature, not the clock. Nobody called them cookies. They were fried cakes, sweet rounds, or just them things mama makes, depending on the household. Fatback fried cookies use simple sugar cookie dough dropped into a skillet where rendered fatback, thick pork fat saved in coffee cans on every black southern stove, served as the frying medium. The fatback gave them a faint, savory undertone that balanced the sweetness in a way butter never could, and that flavor separated the women who knew from those who guessed. The dough was mixed stiff, pinched small, flattened between palms, and fried until both sides turned deep gold, drained on brown paper bags and dusted with sugar while still warm. Through the 1950s and 60s, these showed up at Christmas, Easter, and on summer evenings when kids needed something sweet to chase with cold buttermilk. The tradition faded when vegetable shortening replaced Fatback. The women who rendered their own fat are gone now, and so is everything they carried in the taste. Nothing died in those kitchens, not bread, not milk, not even the heel gone stale 3 days ago. Fried bread pudding squares took the waste nothing rule and turned it into a dessert so good that families saved bread on purpose. Day-old slices were soaked in custard of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon until swelled soft, then pressed into a pan and chilled firm. Cut thick and fried in hot lard, the outside developed a caramelized shell while the inside stayed creamy and custard rich. Church suppers across the South in the 1950s and 60s featured trays of these stacked and dusted with powdered sugar, sitting beside pound cakes and cobblers but disappearing first. The dish had roots in French and Caribbean bread pudding traditions that arrived through New Orleans, then adapted into something fried because in those kitchens, if it could be fried, it would be. What other households called trash, these cooks called the start of dessert. But years before those skillet desserts reached the holiday table, something simpler was feeding families along the Texas-Louisiana border. The dough puffed the instant it hit the oil, ballooning into a hollow pillow so light it nearly floated. Sorghum syrup sopapillas came from where Black and Mexican cooking crossed paths, families sharing neighborhoods, church halls, and cast iron. The dough was basic: flour, baking powder, salt, lard worked by hand, but the frying made it rise. Hot oil at the right temperature ballooned it instead of flattening, creating a pocket that begged to be torn open. Black families poured sorghum syrup inside instead of honey, thick and dark, pressed from cane-like stalks across the South. It soaked into the warm shell and pooled in the center, turning each bite into crunch and liquid sweetness. At Juneteenth tables in East Texas during the 1950s, these sat alongside barbecue and red drink. When sorghum mills closed through the 70s, the sopapilla lost everything that tied it to those kitchens. The custard had to be cold, ice cold, set overnight until firm enough to hold shape on a spoon. That was the first test. If it jiggled too much, it dissolved in the oil and ruined the batch. Fried egg custard puffs were a holiday dessert in Black households across Virginia and the Carolinas. Rich custard, cooked slow with sugar, vanilla, and nutmeg, spooned into small nests of batter and fried until the shell turned gold while the filling stayed cool inside. The technique connected to West African puff puff and French beignet traditions running through Creole cooking, but the custard filling was purely a Black Southern invention, stretching expensive holiday eggs one more course. The women who mastered these read the oil by sound. A low rumble meant too cool, a high sizzle meant too hot, and the soft whisper between meant the custard would survive. They stood without a thermometer, flipping puffs with a bent fork. After they passed, the recipe cards turned up in drawers, but nobody could get the temperature right by feel. In the hills of rural Alabama and Georgia, fall meant one thing before it meant anything else: persimmons. Wild persimmon trees grew along fence lines and at the edges of fields, and the women who knew the land knew exactly when the fruit was ready, soft enough to split in your hand, sweet enough to eat raw, but best when cooked down into a thick pulp and folded into fried dumplings. The pulp was mixed with flour, sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of baking soda, then drop by the spoonful into hot lard, where each dumpling puffs slightly and turned deep amber at the edges. The taste was unlike any other fruit, earthy, almost honey-like, with a sweetness that clung to the back of your throat. You could not buy persimmons at the store. You had to know where the trees grew and wait for the first frost to soften them, because an unripe persimmon would pucker your mouth shut. That knowledge passed through generations of women who walked the same paths every October. When they stopped walking, the trees kept fruiting, but nobody came to pick. The scratches on your arms told the whole story. Blackberry brambles did not give up their fruit without drawing blood. Fried blackberry pockets started with the picking, and the picking was a summer ritual across the Black South. Kids were sent out with 10 buckets in the early morning before the heat settled, told to fill them to the brim and not eat more than a handful on the way home. The berries that survived were cooked down with sugar until thick, then spooned into half moons of pie dough and fried in lard until the crust blistered dark. The filling stayed hot long after the outside cooled, and every child knew to wait, but none of them did, burning the roof of their mouth on the first bite every time. Some grandmothers added lemon to cut the sweetness. Others stirred in nutmeg that sharpened the berry flavor. The recipe was never written because it changed with every batch, depending on how sweet the berries were that morning. When the brambles were cleared for new roads, the pockets went with them. And if you thought patience was needed for those berry pockets, the women who fried pecan praline patties operated on a level that bordered on reckless. The mixture was simple: pecans, brown sugar, butter, cream heated together until it foamed, but the trick was pulling it off the stove at the right second, spooning it onto a greased surface, then flash frying the cool patties in shallow oil just long enough to give them a caramelized shell. Too long and the sugar burned black, too short and the crust never set. Along the Gulf Coast from Mobile to New Orleans, black street vendors sold these, from trays balanced on their arms, wrapped in wax paper and still warm. The pecans came from trees in nearly every southern yard, shaken loose in November, cracked on the porch, sorted into mason jars. During the 1950s, you could smell these frying from half a block away at fish fry gatherings. The flavor sat between candy and pastry, crunchy, buttery, and gone too fast. There was no donut cutter, there was no recipe card. There was a woman, a bowl of dough, and a pot of lard on a Saturday morning. And that was all anybody needed. Lard fried donut holes were pinched from leftover biscuit or bread dough, rolled between the palms into rough balls, and dropped into bubbling fat until they bobbed to the surface, golden and hollow inside. The kids who smelled them frying knew better than to reach into the pot, but they stood close enough to catch the ones that rolled off the plate. And somehow, one always rolled. The argument started before the sugar hit the surface. Who got the first one? Who got the biggest? Who ate 3 when everyone else only got 2? In families with 6 or 7 mouths, those donut holes were counted like currency, and the woman frying them kept a mental ledger sharper than any bank. After she passed, Saturday mornings went quiet in a way nobody expected. Every black yard in the Deep South had a fig tree, not because anyone planted them on purpose. They just appeared, spreading from the ones missionaries and enslaved people had tended generations before, roots tracing back through Mediterranean and North African trade routes that predated the Atlantic crossing. The figs ripened in waves through July and August, more than any household could eat fresh, so they were preserved in sugar syrup, dried on racks, or cooked down into a thick paste and folded into cornmeal crust for frying. Fried fig cakes had a flavor between jam and caramel, the fig's sweetness deepening in hot, oil until it turned smoky. The cornmeal crust gave each bite a grainy crunch no wheat flour could match. Grandmothers guarded their fig preserves the way they guarded their cast iron. You did not touch either without permission. When a fig tree died in someone's yard, the whole neighborhood felt it because that tree had been feeding people since before anyone living could remember who planted it. Winter nights moved slow in the rural South, and the kitchen was the only warm room in the house. That was when Molasses taffy came out, cooked on the stove until it reached the hard cracked stage, pulled by hand until it turned from dark to golden, then twisted into ropes and cut into short pieces. But some families took it one step further, dipping those cut pieces in a thin flour batter and frying them fast in hot lard. The result was a candy wrapped in a crisp shell, crunchy outside, chewy, and warm inside. The molasses flavor concentrated and almost burnt in the best way. Making them was a group effort. Someone stirred the pot, someone pulled the taffy, someone cut, someone fried. The kitchen filled with steam and laughter and sticky handprints on every surface. It was dessert, but it was also entertainment, the only kind that cost nothing but time and a jar of molasses. By the 1970s, store-bought candy replaced the ritual and the nights got quieter. You probably remember corn fritters as a side dish, savory, salty, served alongside fried fish at the family reunion. But in the 1950s and 60s, black kitchens across the South made a sweet version that nobody talks about anymore. Fresh corn, scraped off the cob at the end of summer, was stirred into a batter, sweetened with sugar and warm cinnamon, then fried in small rounds until the corn kernels burst and caramelized against the hot oil. The sweetness of late-season corn needed almost no help. Sometimes the sugar was left out entirely, and the corn did all the work itself. These showed up at the tail end of harvest when the last ears were too starchy for boiling but too good to waste. Eaten hot with a drizzle of cane syrup, they tasted like summer trying to hold on a little longer. Few people under 60 remember them as a dessert, but ask anyone older and watch their eyes go wide. There was always leftover dough. After the biscuits were cut and the pan slid into the oven, the scraps sat on the floured counter, too small for another round, too precious to throw away. Fried cinnamon biscuit strips turned those scraps into the treat kids waited for more than the biscuits themselves. The leftover dough was pulled into rough strips and dropped into the same skillet where breakfast bacon had just fried, the grease still popping, turned once until puffed and golden on both sides. Tossed in a bowl of cinnamon and sugar, they were handed directly to the nearest child whose fingers were already reaching. The taste was part biscuit, part donut, part whatever the bacon grease remembered from that morning. It existed only in the 10 minutes between baking and sitting down to eat. No recipe, no plan, just a woman who refused to waste dough and a child who learned that the best things in the kitchen were never on the menu. Those 10 minutes are what they missed the most. Coconut was a luxury in most black Southern pantries. The whole ones appeared around Christmas, heavy in the palm, dark husks, hiding sweet white meat cracked open with a hammer on the back porch. But shredded coconut in a bag was cheaper, and that went into fried coconut balls. The shredded coconut was mixed with sweetened condensed milk until it held together, rolled into tight rounds, dipped in a light egg and flour batter, and fried in the lard until the shell turned gold, while the coconut inside melted into something between candy and custard. Caribbean households that had settled in coastal cities from Savannah to Houston during the 1940s brought versions with them: coconut drops, sugar cakes, fried coconut pastries that merged with the frying tradition already thick in those kitchens. Church socials in the 50s and 60s always had a plate of these near the back, brought by the same woman every time, empty before the sermon let out. Nobody asked for the recipe while she was alive. Everyone wished they had after. The pear tree stood in the yard longer than anyone in the household had been alive. It dropped fruit every September, hard, gritty pears, no good raw, but turned soft and sweet when peeled, sliced, and simmered with sugar. Fried pear fritters took that cooked fruit and stirred it into thick batter with cinnamon and vanilla, then dropped by the spoonful into hot lard, where each one spread slightly and fried up with lacy, crisp edges. The pear gave it a delicate sweetness, lighter than apple, more fragrant than peach, a flavor that tasted like it belonged to one specific tree in one specific yard. In rural Mississippi and Georgia, people made these every fall without thinking of them as special because pears were free and frying was how you handle surplus. The tree is probably still standing somewhere right now, dropping fruit nobody picks. The woman who stood under it with a basket each September has been gone a long time. In the low country kitchens of South Carolina and coastal Georgia, rice was not a side dish, it was the foundation. Fried sweet rice cakes were made from leftover cooked rice, stirred with sugar, egg, vanilla, and flour, formed into flat patties and fried in lard until both sides turned golden with edges that crackled. The tradition connected to West African rice cultures, Senegambian and Sierra Leonean communities, where rice cakes were fried in palm oil at celebrations, a practice carried across the Atlantic by enslaved people forced to grow that same crop in Carolina fields. The sweetened version became a gula geechee dessert made with broken rice grains from the bottom of the pot, too small to sell but too good to waste. The rice had to be sticky, cooked soft so the starch held the cakes together. Eaten warm with cinnamon, they carried a chewiness no wheat dessert could match. The dish faded as low country communities scattered and the old rice varieties vanished from local fields. The mason jars lined up on the pantry shelf like a calendar. Strawberry from June, peach from July, plum from August, grape from September. Every jar was a season sealed shut, and when winter came, fried jam turnovers brought summer back one spoonful at a time. The dough was pie crust or leftover biscuit dough, rolled flat and cut into circles. A generous spoonful of whatever preserves had been put up that year went in the center, the edges pinched tight, and the turnovers hit hot lard with a sizzle. The jam melted inside, turning liquid, trapped in a shell of crisp golden crust. Every household had its own preserve, the one the grandmother made best, the one nobody else could match. You could taste the difference between strawberry cooked in a copper pot and one made in aluminum. These details mattered, and only the women who canned the fruit knew them. When the jars ran out and no one was left to fill them, the turnovers stopped too. If you got the Sunday frying assignment wrong, the whole table knew. Fried buttermilk cake rings were the test. Thick rounds of cake batter enriched with tangy buttermilk and a whisper of nutmeg, piped or spooned into ring shapes and fried in deep lard until the outside blistered and the inside stayed moist and tender. The buttermilk gave them a slight sour edge that balanced the sugar and kept them from being too rich. At funeral repasts across the South, these rings appeared on tables brought by the women who had been frying the longest, their presence a quiet announcement of rank in the kitchen hierarchy. Nobody told you to make them. You stood and watched until you were trusted to try. The first batch was always wrong. The second was close. The third was yours. Now the women who earned that rank are buried in the same churchyards where the repasts were held and the rings went into the ground with them. This was not a recipe anyone chose. It was a recipe that chose them when the cupboard held nothing else. Fried syrup-soaked biscuits started with stale biscuits past eating on their own, sliced in half and fried in lard until the cut sides crisped, then stacked and drenched in cane syrup or sorghum until they softened back to life. In Gula, Geechee communities along coastal South Carolina and Georgia, this came from the tradition of wasting nothing. The sorghum was pressed at local mills every fall, thick, dark syrup that poured like slow honey. It hit the hot biscuit and soaked through, turning each bite into layers, crispy from the frying, soft from the soaking, sweet from the syrup, and underneath it all the ghost of whatever lard had been in that biscuit the first time. It tasted like making do. It tasted like someone loved you enough to turn stale bread into something warm. The mills are closed now, and the biscuits come from a can. The pumpkins were not decorations. They were food, and in black kitchens across the South, they were cooked down to a smooth puree and fried into spiced fritters long before anyone thought to carve a face on one. Fried pumpkin fritters mixed that puree with flour, egg, brown sugar, cinnamon, ginger, and a pinch of clove, then dropped into hot lard, where they fried up soft and fragrant with a thin crust that barely held the filling together. The spice mixture varied by household. Some used allspice, some added a scrape of fresh nutmeg, and at least one grandmother in every community used black pepper, which gave the fritter a quiet heat nobody could identify but everyone noticed. Fall gardens in the 1940s and 50s produced more pumpkin than any household could use, and frying was one of the fastest ways to turn surplus into something sweet. Eaten warm with a drizzle of molasses, they tasted like autumn in a single bite. Christmas Eve had its own rhythm in those kitchens, the sound of dough being kneaded on a floured board while the rest of the house slept, the pop of oil heating in the deep pot, the soft thud of puffs landing on brown paper to drain. Fried nutmeg sugar puffs were a holiday tradition in black households from Virginia down through the Carolinas. Small rounds of enriched dough, heavy with freshly grated nutmeg, fried until they puffed hollow and golden, then rolled in sugar while steam still rose off them. The nutmeg had to be whole, grated on a tin rasped right into the batter, because the pre-ground kind from the store had lost its oils and tasted like dust. That was a rule that never got written down, but never got broken either. She made them alone, usually past midnight, so they would be fresh when the house woke up Christmas morning. The kitchen smelled like nutmeg for days afterward. Now, Christmas mornings smell like coffee and whatever came out of a package. The nutmeg puffs needed hands that knew the dough by touch, and those hands are still. Dried apricots were a store-bought luxury, bright orange, tangy, and too expensive to eat by the handful, so every piece went into something that stretched them further. Fried dried apricot hand pies took a small pouch of those precious fruits, simmered them soft with sugar and a squeeze of lemon, and folded the filling into pie dough for frying. The apricot's tartness cut through the sweetness of the crust in a way no other fruit could, leaving a sharp, bright taste that lingered. Traveling preachers and railroad workers carried these in their coat pockets during the 1940s and 50s, wrapped in cloth to keep for the road. They held up for days without spoiling. The woman who sent you off with one in your pocket was saying something she would never say out loud: "Come back safe." Most of those women are gone. The hand pies they packed for the journey stopped being made when there was no one left to send off. It started before church and ended after everyone else had eaten. Fried sorghum bread was the first thing in the skillet on Sunday mornings in black kitchens across the rural South, and making it right took patience that had nothing to do with clocks. The batter was cornmeal stirred into sorghum syrup with just enough flour to give it body, a pinch of salt, a crack of egg. Poured thin into a greased skillet, it fried slowly until the bottom set, dark and crisp, then was flipped whole, the moment that separated the cooks from the ones still learning. The sorghum turned the bread almost black at the edges, sweet and faintly bitter the way only sorghum could be. Eaten hot with butter, it was breakfast and dessert and a kind of Sunday morning communion that needed no sermon. The old women made it without thinking, one hand on the skillet, one reaching for the plate, eyes already on the next thing. Those Sunday mornings do not exist anymore. You can find the sorghum, heat the skillet, mix the batter, but the kitchen will be quiet, and that quiet is the thing no recipe can fix.
Graham cracker sandwiches were the secret weapon of busy mothers who needed something sweet in seconds flat. 2 graham cracker squares sandwiched a thick layer of frosting, peanut butter, or sweetened cream cheese, creating a handheld treat that satisfied without any cooking. Children came home from school to find these waiting on kitchen counters, the simple combination somehow tasting better than anything store-bought. Mothers kept graham crackers in the pantry specifically for these quick desserts, knowing they could assemble a batch while doing other tasks. The crackers provided just enough crunch against the creamy filling, and the whole thing could be eaten without plates or forks. Some mothers added chocolate drizzle or cinnamon to make them feel special.
Persimmon pudding appeared on African American Christmas tables when wild persimmons ripened in late autumn, their orange globes hanging from bare branches like holiday ornaments. Families knew to wait until frost sweetened the fruit, transforming its astringent bite into something almost tropical. The persimmons were pressed through colanders to create smooth pulp that formed the heart of this custard-like dessert. Mixed with eggs, buttermilk, brown sugar, and spices, the batter baked into something between bread pudding and pie, dense, moist, and deeply flavored. Children helped gather fruit, learning which trees produce the sweetest persimmons and how to spot ripeness by touch. The pudding was served warm with hard sauce or cold cream, its flavor impossible to replicate with store-bought ingredients. Persimmon pudding connected families to the land and seasons in ways modern desserts cannot. It has largely disappeared as wild persimmon trees became scarce and foraging traditions faded from memory. Divinity candy represented the precarious magic of Christmas candy making, a fluffy white confection that could fail spectacularly if humidity crept too high or temperatures dropped wrong. African American mothers learned to read the weather before attempting divinity, choosing crisp, clear days when sugar syrup would behave properly. The process required pouring hot sugar syrup in thin streams into beaten egg whites, transforming the mixture into clouds of sweetness that held shape when dropped onto waxed paper. Pecans or walnuts studded each piece, adding crunch to the ethereal candy. Children watched the transformation with wonder, seeing how patience and skill could create something that looked like edible snow. Divinity was packed into tins and given as gifts, proof of a mother's dedication and expertise. The candy didn't keep long, which made it special, a Christmas-only treat that couldn't be replicated during humid summer months. Failed batches were never wasted, but spread on toast, teaching that even mistakes could nourish.
Jell-O with fruit cocktail was the jewel-toned dessert that sparkled on tables across Black households throughout the 1960s. Mothers dissolved bright red, orange, or green gelatin powder in hot water, stirred in cold, then folded in canned fruit cocktail before chilling. The result was a wobbly, sweet treat that children found endlessly fascinating, watching the suspended fruit pieces float in the colorful gel. It required no cooking beyond boiling water and could be made the night before, freeing mothers for other tasks. The dessert appeared at potlucks in decorative molds, at home in simple bowls, and always drew smiles from children who loved its bouncy texture. Fruit cocktails stretched the dessert further, making one box of Jell-O feed the whole family with fruit in every spoonful.
Lane cake was the showstopper of African American Christmas celebrations, a towering white layer cake with boozy filling that made adults smile and children curious. The layers were tender white cake, but the magic lived in the filling: butter, sugar, egg yolks, raisins, coconut, pecans, and enough bourbon to make the kitchen smell like celebration. The filling was cooked slowly until thickened, then spread generously between layers while still warm. Fluffy white frosting covered the outside, hiding treasure within until the first slice revealed swirls of golden filling studded with nuts and fruit. Making Lane cake was an all-day affair that brought generations together, stirring and tasting and guarding the bourbon bottle from overly helpful hands. It was served at Christmas dinner as the final course, a reward for patience and togetherness. Lane cake requires skill and time that modern cooks rarely invest, leaving it as a fading memory of celebrations past. Lane cake carried Alabama heritage into 1960s Black Christmas celebrations, a white layer cake filled with bourbon-soaked raisins, pecans, and coconut that made adults smile knowingly while children enjoyed the sweetness. The filling was cooked slowly, eggs and sugar combined with butter until thick, then studded with dried fruits and nuts plumped in whiskey overnight. Some mothers used homemade fruit wine when bourbon was unavailable, achieving similar depth with whatever spirits the household kept. The cake layers themselves were tender and pale, made with egg whites only, providing neutral canvas for the rich filling. Lane cake was considered fancy enough for company, but affordable enough for families who saved throughout the year for Christmas splurges. The bourbon flavor mellowed as the cake aged, making it better on Christmas Day than when first assembled. Mothers who made exceptional Lane cake earned reputations that followed them through decades of church gatherings and family reunions.
Vanilla wafer banana pudding cups were the dessert that appeared at church suppers, family reunions, and Sunday dinners without fail. Black mothers layered vanilla wafers with sliced bananas and instant vanilla pudding in small cups or glasses, creating individual servings that looked fancy but took almost no time. The pudding was mixed with cold milk and whisked until thick, then spooned over the wafers while children waited impatiently for their share. As the dessert sat, the wafers softened and absorbed the creamy pudding, creating a texture that melted on the tongue. Mothers made these in assembly line fashion, filling a dozen cups in minutes while dinner finished cooking. The combination of sweet vanilla, fresh banana, and tender cookie satisfied every craving without heating up the kitchen.
Sweet potato pone was the humble centerpiece of African American holiday tables, carrying both African roots and Southern resourcefulness in every dense slice. Unlike smoother sweet potato pie, pone was made by grating raw sweet potatoes and mixing them with molasses, butter, eggs, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger. The batter was poured into a cast iron skillet greased with lard and baked slowly until the edges caramelized and the center set into something between pudding and cake. The texture was chewy and custard-like, with bits of grated potato giving it an earthy sweetness refined sugar could never match. Families served it warm at Christmas dinner, sometimes with cane syrup or cream. It was deeply satisfying, a reminder that the sweetest things came from gardens and grandmothers who measured nothing but knew everything. Sweet potato pone has nearly vanished from modern tables, yet those who remember it recall its warmth with reverence. Japanese fruitcake held a mystifying name that had nothing to do with Japan and everything to do with Southern Black Christmas tradition. This layered spice cake, alternated with coconut filling, became the centerpiece that grandmothers started preparing weeks before the holiday arrived. The layers were dense with raisins, nuts, and warm spices, cinnamon, allspice, and cloves that perfumed kitchens for days. Between each layer went a cooked filling of fresh coconut, sugar, and citrus that set into something almost candy-like. Families debated whether the name came from the exotic coconut or simply from wanting the cake to sound fancy. What mattered more was the ritual: children grating coconuts by hand, mothers stirring filling on the stove, grandmothers supervising every step. The cake improved as it aged, wrapped in cloth and stored in cool pantries where flavors melded into something transcendent. By Christmas morning, each slice revealed beautiful layers that tasted like heritage itself.
Instant chocolate pudding revolutionized weeknight desserts in Black households during the 1960s, transforming 3 minutes of whisking into creamy satisfaction. Mothers poured the powder into cold milk, beat it with a hand mixer or whisk until thick, then spooned it into cups for eager children who could barely wait for it to set. The pudding could be eaten immediately while still soft, or chilled until firm, depending on how patient the family felt. Some mothers topped it with Cool Whip, vanilla wafers, or crushed peanuts for texture. The convenience was revolutionary, allowing working mothers to provide homemade tasting dessert without spending precious evening hours in the kitchen. Children grew up believing their mothers made the best pudding, never realizing the magic came from a small box.
Molasses pound cake carried the weight of tradition in every dark, dense slice that graced African American Christmas tables throughout the 1960s. This was not pale, buttery pound cake. It was richer, deeper, made with blackstrap molasses that gave it smoky sweetness. Grandmothers creamed butter and sugar by hand until their arms ached, then folded in eggs before adding molasses, flour, and spices that filled kitchens with holiday warmth. The cake baked low and slow in tube pans, emerging with a crackled top and moist crumb that lasted for days. Families sliced it thin and served it with coffee after Christmas dinner, passing plates while elders told stories of holidays past. Molasses was cheaper than refined sugar and carried more nutrition, making this cake both practical and indulgent. It represented the ingenuity of Black cooks who transformed pantry staples into celebration. Though rarely baked today, molasses pound cake remains a taste of Christmas memory for those who knew it. 30 desserts, 30 kitchens that went quiet. Like and subscribe if your grandmother's hands made something no recipe could replace.